All right, so now let's talk about another concept that you'll encounter over and over again on the logical reasoning section, which is that of a comparative statement, kind of like this one, but not really like this one because this is a simple version of a comparative statement. The kind of comparative statements you'll get on the LSAT are riddled with details, complexities, and modifiers. But let's work with this simple version. I'm sure you guys all know what this means. Xiuming is taller than Emma. But I want to use this as a way to introduce a framework for analyzing any comparative statements, regardless of its level of simplicity or complexity. Okay, so the idea here is when you're dealing with a comparative statement, first of all, you have to develop a nose for it. Just like how I mentioned in the referential phrase lesson that you're not going to know to fill in the referential phrasing if you don't even know that you're reading a referential phrase. Just like how here, you're not going to know to do this comparative understanding unless you can identify a comparative statement in the first place. So focus on this word than. And most comparative statements use this word than to do the comparing. So if you see this word than, think to yourself, okay, in a comparative statement, they're always comparing two things, to people, to places, to ideas, to whatever. Right? Two things being compared. Here, it's two people, one person named Xiuming, the other person named Emma. So you're gonna just place those two things side by side, put a little V between them to say that we're comparing this to this. The next thing you need to figure out is what are we comparing them on? I mean, you can compare Xiuming and Emma on any number of criteria or characteristics, right? Who is better looking? Who is a faster runner? Who's a better chef? Right, but we're not doing any of that. We're just comparing them on this idea of who's taller, right? Who's taller. So once you've established what, like the two entities being compared against and what we're comparing them on, the only last thing you need to do is declare the quote unquote winner. And here, I don't want you to think of like winning is not inherently good or anything. It's just when you look at these two entities and you're comparing them on this thing, who's got more of this thing? Taller, right? So that's Xiuming according to the statement. So Xiuming is quote unquote the winner. Now, if being tall is a good thing, then I suppose winning is good. But if being short is the better thing, then even though Xiuming wins, he actually loses, right? Do you see what I mean? So like when I say winning, it just means who's got more of this feature. Now, one other thing I want you to recall is this idea that we talked about in the some not versus not every lesson, right? The idea that on LSAT, there are many different ways to use English to express the same idea, right? But different words in English. Should come as no surprise then, for comparative statements, that's also true. There are ways to express logically the same relationship between Xiuming and Emma using slightly different words. For example, we can say this, Emma is shorter than Xiuming. That's the same thing, right? These two statements are exactly equivalent. So now in this second version, instead of taller being the comparative, shorter is now the thing that we're comparing them on. And in this case, Emma wins, right? Quote unquote wins, meaning Emma's got more of this feature that we're comparing. But, they're saying exactly the same thing. So this is really important. Again, because, and you might already know why. Think about why from the question that we just saw, it was important to recognize different ways to phrase the same idea. It's because the answers might disguise it like this. That's why it's important. Now I want you to contrast this claim against these two claims. Is this claim saying the same thing as these claims? Or another related question you might think about is this claim entailed by these two claims? If these two claims are true, does it follow that this claim is true? No. Okay, no. Because there's a difference between comparative claims which are relative. Okay, they're relative, meaning when we talk about height in these two sentences, it is a relative comparison of Xiuming and Emma. It's like if you want to line up everyone from, the shortest, like imagine you're doing a logic game, right? The shortest people on the left and the tallest people on the right. All you can do with Xiuming and Emma is you have to line them up like this. Emma is to the left of Xiuming. Emma, that's it, right? Like, we just don't know in an absolute sense, right? Absolute sense where either of them are on this scale. It's possible that Xiuming is taller than Emma, but both of them are actually below average in height, right? So Xiuming is not tall, Xiuming is short, but still taller than Emma. Or it's also possible that Xiuming and Emma are both giants, but Xiuming is more of a giant than Emma, right? So they're both super tall, in which case this is true. Emma is tall as well, right? But the point is, these claims do not place this relationship on the spectrum anywhere. All these claims do is say that these two entities have this relationship where Shiming is to the right of Emma and Emma is to the left of Shiming, where right means more tall, left means more short. But where do you place them, right? Where do you place these two? These two statements are like, I don't know, I'm not going to say. I'm going to be silent about that question. Whereas this claim is not being silent. It's being very loud. It's saying, you know where Shiming goes? Shiming goes like, I mean, what is tall, right? I guess let's just say above average height, right? Let's say this anywhere over here is tall. So this claim is saying, oh, for sure, Shiming is over here on this half of the spectrum. Do you see those are very different claims. One is an absolute claim. These two are relative claims. So you want to be covering two related topics here. One is just within the comparative, within the relative claim, how do you understand the relative claim? And what I said was you have to first identify that you're dealing with a comparative, identify the two things that are being compared on and what they're being compared on, and then ultimately who, quote unquote, wins, right? So that's the first idea. The second idea is I don't want you to get this confused with an absolute claim. Even after having done all that, all you've done is you establish relative order, right? Relative, comparative, not absolute, not that Shiming is tall or Emma is short. All right, so let's look at another example. This one, as you can see, is more wordy. It's more likely that the dog went through the trash than that the cat did. Okay, so once again, we know it's a comparative because of the word than. So we're comparing something to something. What are we comparing? Like, what are the two things that we're comparing and what's the feature of comparison? Right? One thing that we're comparing is an idea in this case, right? The idea that it was the dog that dug through the trash, right? The other idea is the competing idea that it's the cat. Don't blame the dog, right? The real culprit here is the cat that went through the trash. And we're comparing these two ideas or these two hypotheses, right? Imagine you come home and the trash can is the kitchen is a mess, right? Trash can's flipped over, contents out, and you just go into detective mode, which one of you jerks did that, right? And you're trying to assign likelihood, you're trying to assign probability, you're trying to say which of these two hypotheses is more likely to be true. Is it more likely that it's the dog or is it more likely that it's a cat? And according to this sentence, it's more likely that it's the dog. So the dog trash can hypothesis wins the more likely to be true. So in this case, you're saying, look, it's more likely that the dog did it. Now, the equivalent way of saying that is to say it's less likely that the cat did it, right? So that's the, one way of saying the comparative, I'm taller than you. Another way of equivalently saying the same thing, you're shorter than me, right? It's more likely that the dog did it. It's less likely that the cat did it. Now, be careful not to make the mistake that either the dog or the cat did it. You're just saying compared between these two hypotheses, right? If you're asking me to decide, is it the cat or is it the dog? Between these two, I'm leaning towards the dog. But once again, if you'll let me invoke this spectrum of either 0% chance of something happening or 100% certainty that the thing happened, all I'm saying is that the dog hypothesis, the theory that the dog did it, is on the right of the theory that the cat did it, that I'm more leaning towards the dog doing it than the cat doing it. But I'm not placing this dog more likely than cat on the spectrum because, the statement just doesn't say. Does the statement say that it's over here, that the dog's percentage, what is that? This is like about 60%, right? This is like about 53%. No, right? The statement just doesn't say. It could be that, the percentage is over here, right? Because you know what? You have a raccoon in your house. We just weren't told that there's actually a raccoon living in the house. If there were a raccoon living in the house, I'm going to say, even though, compared to the dog versus the cat, the cat almost never goes to the trash. The dog sometimes goes to the trash, but you know what? If there's a raccoon in the house, sure, it's still more likely that the dog went to the trash than the cat, but it's far more likely that it's actually the raccoon that went through the trash. So you see, I would place both of them over here. Do you see what I mean? Again, you don't want to compare, you don't want to confuse rather the comparative, the relative versus the absolute.